Greetings. My name is Eliza Punzlin Randall, and I am the CEO. Very privileged to have and honored to have this position with YWCA Knoxville and the Tennessee Valley. And we're very excited to be talking about one of our nearest and dearest programs of the YWCA, which is our Game Changers program. And we have some amazing top-notch individuals who are here to join us to talk about the importance of bystander intervention. And I think we're hopefully everyone's going to be enjoying this after we get through this conversation, this dialogue with each other. But before we start into the meat of the panel, I wanted to turn it over to Kendrick or Dawn to talk about Game Changers briefly. We don't want to give everything away right now, but to talk about the Game Changers program.
Awesome. Thank you, Eliza. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Just wave at me if you can't. How about Kendrick and Dawn? I'll pass it off to him in a second to talk a little bit. But like Eliza said, we're so glad that everyone's here. Game Changers is a program that we love working for and with, that we're super excited about. It's a program that puts two adult male mentors with a group of middle school boys. Obviously, this is outside of a pandemic. And we do it in both school settings and after school settings. And it's a 14-week semester-long program that's data-driven, that's focused on amplifying the voices of women and engaging men and these boys in preventing violence against women and girls. And so it started funded through the Department of Justice. And it's a great program. We try to meet kids where they're at with their different learning styles and focus in the last 5 weeks about bystander intervention and really teaching these kids how they can intervene and prevent violence against women and girls. But I think Kendrick will talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. So when we're discussing the bystander intervention piece to our program, is a very vital, important part that we teach our young men, like how to handle certain situations and how to seek help and get help for when they witness victims of violence. So with that component, you have to think about the empathy part of it, because I think without empathy, you don't even get to the other 5 steps of bystander. So that empathy part is very important, and it's just the ability to share someone else's feelings. So when we're talking about the bystander intervention, we talk about, like I said, those 5 steps, and those are asking for help, talking to the victim, how to get involved, challenging, and teaching your peers about what you've learned in Game Changers. So when we're talking about asking, we're talking about just simply asking for help. When we're talking about talking, we're talking about talking to the victim, either before something happens or even after something happens. And the third component is getting involved. And we always our young men to get involved when it's safe, because you want to keep yourself safe as well as the victim. And so the best time to do that is, hopefully you want to intervene, like I said before. The next one is challenging. We want to challenge our peers. That means, like, if someone tells an inappropriate joke, hold them accountable and, tell them that joke's inappropriate, but not just that, but then you want to tell them why it's not, why that's not cool thing to do. And the last one is teaching, and it's just teaching others what you've learned in Game Changers. So providing that knowledge so that you can pass it on, the information that you've learned, that you can pass it on to your friends on how to stop violence against women and girls. And I know Kat will talk about this more, but bystanders as being like advocates, and so she'll tie in that piece. I don't want to give away nothing on that. So, but those are the key components of the bystander intervention in our program.
Thank you, Kendrick, and thank you, Dawn. So as Dawn and Kendrick mentioned, so the purpose of today's panel is for us to have a meaningful dialogue on bystander intervention, why it's important, what barriers prevent someone from intervening, and how we can encourage people to be active bystanders. So before we begin, if we could take just a brief moment to introduce ourselves and tell the viewers what you do by day. So Don, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. I'm one of the mentor coordinators for the YWCA. In September, this will be my third year with Game Changers. So I've been able to lead groups for middle school boys in the Game Changers program. I think last count was over 100 boys and 15 groups, and excited to work. I've been able to work with Kendrick too, who'll introduce himself later as a key part of that team.
See, Pete Buckner.
I'm currently the restorative liaison at Northwest Middle School with Knox County School District. We have yet to start Game Changers. I know it had been here in the past, and I've worked with the school coordinator here and getting that started back. We're yet to see what that'll look like in the next semester or two. But before coming to Northwest, I was behavior interventionist at Richard Yoakley Alternative School, to where we held Game Changers several semesters there. And had the opportunity to see how that program kind of grew, learning what to expect when rolling that out to middle schoolers. So I was kind of excited to see how it took shape there, be a part of getting it into some other middle schools within the district, and then also now trying to get it growing back at Northwest Middle School.
Dr. Conley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meghan Conley, and I am the Director of Community Partnerships and Assistant Professor of Practice in the Department of Sociology at UT. I'm also a founding steering committee member of ACAN, Allies of Knoxville's Immigrant Neighbors.
And what she probably wouldn't add, because I know that she's very humble, is that she is a 2019 Tribute to Women honoree for our racial and social justice category. So I'm just adding that little bit. Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Jones. I'm the Victim Advocacy Program Coordinator for the YWCA. So I kind of oversee our advocacy program, which provides crisis intervention services, safety planning, referrals to community resources for victims of domestic violence.
Thanks, Catherine. Dr. Lynn Sacco?
Excuse me, I'm an associate professor of history at UT, although I'm lucky to be retiring 5 days officially. Before that, though, I was a family law lawyer in Chicago. I've worked on domestic violence literally since law review in the 1970s. I worked in family court. I worked in juvenile court, where they were trying to get young Black men designated sex offenders at 10 years old. And I came to UT, where my research and my teaching has been in the histories of particularly masculinity, and particularly how white masculinity has become so racialized, and the privileges that go with it. The exciting part for me in Knoxville, it's been 16 years, is that teaching this material led to a shocking, to me, number of young men of all types who came to me to have very personal discussions about their inability to understand what it meant to be a man. And I've been very moved by that.
Thank you. Kendrick?
With Don. And I'm also a full-time juvenile probation officer at Knox County Juvenile Court, and Game Changers has played an integral part in some of our prevention programs. Actually, it's something new that we've never done before, but the partnership, the relationship is very vital, and we see this program as something new that we can jump on board and not only improve the lives of our young people, but definitely address the issue of domestic violence and sexual assault with our young men down at juvenile court.
Thanks, Kendrick. And last but not least, Chris Whitehead.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Chris Whitehead, program specialist for Big Brothers Big Sisters of East Tennessee. Also a Game Changers mentor. I've done a number of sessions with some of the middle school boys that we've identified on our waiting list, or either that are already in our program, that wanted to be involved in the program. And so I've had the opportunity to lead those, whether they were at Richard Yoakley or they've been at the YWCA facility. downtown. So just a really good opportunity to get young men involved, me as a man and other men, to talk about something such as this that needs to be conversations amongst, men and boys. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you, everybody. So just a few housekeeping, maybe just one housekeeping rule when it comes to Zoom. If you're not speaking, if you could go ahead and mute yourself so we don't have any extra background noise. So let's just dive right in. Our first question, because I wanted to see how we could take the expertise of all of you and try to piece together something that is provides some backstory, some background for the viewer, and then leading up to action. What is it that the average person can do? How can they be a productive, effective bystander in this work? So this question is for Lynn. Lynn, so much of violence prevention work has revolved around telling women how to avoid becoming a victim. Why is it important that we address men and their role in violence against women?
I think the best way I can answer that is to talk about something that happened last year. I taught a course on the history of rape, and there were a number of courageous men in the course. It was mostly women. I've taught it a number of times. There were male and female students who self-identified as victims of sexual violence in the class. There were also students who identified as family members of women or other men who had suffered sexual violence. So for the most part, there were no men that took the course intending to be annoying, and they were just as engaged as the women. But what happened was, after the class started, every one of them came to me and said, essentially, my sister got raped. I know what it's like when this stuff happens, but I'm embarrassed to be in a class listening to how men behave and have to read this material all week. And at the end of the class, every single one of them came and had this was on their own, a very emotional statement to me, saying that sitting there listening for an entire semester to women talking about their experiences was the most difficult thing they had ever done, but that for the first time they had a sense of why sexual violence was a big deal. Okay, which was both a happy thing to hear, but appalling. Because these were men who were already interested in the issue. These weren't people saying, women make this stuff up all the time. They condemned bystanders who did nothing when we talked about it. But when I would ask them what they would have done in that situation, honestly, they don't have a response. So it made me feel optimistic that more people, if they had some idea how to act, might act. It hadn't occurred to me that they simply lack the information to understand how to move forward.
Thanks, Lynn. Thank you for sharing that. Very personal, and I feel like each of us could probably put ourselves in that classroom. This one's for Megan. How do men perform masculinity, and how can men break out of that?
Well, I would say that masculinity doesn't have to be any one thing. There are, gender norms and masculinities are multiple and diverse. They vary from culture to culture. They vary across historical periods. They vary by race, by sexuality, by class, religion, physical ability, and so on. And they even vary at different points of any one man's life. We can think about the data that show that men are frequently more nurturing as grandfathers than they were as fathers, for example. So this concept of how men perform masculinity, I think there really are multiple and diverse ways of doing gender. Now, certainly men and boys can opt for alternative masculinities that embrace the complexity and variety of the human experience. And at the same time, I'm uncomfortable saying that all of this is a choice. It probably doesn't feel like a choice. His fingernails or cries or does whatever else that violates these norms of masculinity that are built around the sense that boys don't cry, that boys must be violent, that boys must be dominant. And it may not feel like a choice for a man who's told to man up and handle it when he feels lost in depression or anxiety. I think, as a sociologist, I like to remember that masculinity is a social construct and we all live in society. So toxic masculinity is the air that all of us breathe, whether or not we agree with it, whether or not it's something that informs how we personally act, it's still part of who we are as a society. So at the same time, people change society. We do it all the time. We identify injustice and we push back. We don't have to accept a society that we don't want to live in just because that's the way it is, but neither can we change society on our own. I do think that we as a society need to create space for alternative masculinities or other gender expressions that embrace the whole human existence. And I think that we can all be advocates for that diversity of human experience. And part of the way of doing that is advocating not just for alternative forms of masculinity, but advocating for the full inclusion of all people in a way that embraces the diversity of sexual and gender identities and all other forms of identity. We can challenge sexism and homophobia and transphobia whenever it shows up, including in words and phrases that denigrate weakness and vulnerability and femininity. We can repudiate the use of violence, violent actions, and violent speech. And that repudiation of violence, I think, needs to happen not just in our personal lives, but in the public sphere as well. Society in which violence permeates our social institutions. The traditional criminal justice system is a violent institution. The immigration enforcement system is a violent institution. These are violent systems that cause a great deal of harm. So when I think of men breaking out of performing toxic forms of masculinity, I think that the way that we all get free is that we all get free.
Could I just add something to what Dr. Conley said? This is very interesting. I think I agree with what you're saying, but I think that part of the problem, if we compare masculinity as a concept, okay, we all have, like when I say masculinity, we all understand it somehow, but we may not understand it exactly the same way. I think it's very much like marriage. We all know what marriage means, but every married couple or every relationship in a marriage is not exactly the same. And some marriages the woman wears the pants, some marriages there's many children, some there's not. Some are companionate, some are more domineering, but they're all marriage. I think the problem when we talk about masculinity is the idea that it's a natural trait for men that arises from a biological organ, and men seem to never be satisfied that they're masculine. Every day they got to get up and prove it again. It's exhausting in a way that I don't see women worrying about being women in every day. That's something I never worry about. And I found few women that worry about it. For men, it's a big obsession. And I think that's other men doing that. But I think it's because literally who wakes up feeling like I'm the man? Everyone doesn't feel that way every day. And if you believe your masculinity is natural, I can see why that makes people crazy. So while it's true that there's violence, some of that violence is heroic, right? And then some of it is coded as negative, but it's hard to just take a trait like violence and separate it from the idea, if you think some kind of masculinity is naturally, in the David French view, naturally aggressive, enjoys violence, but there's an assumption that it's only directed in an appropriate way. So I think a lot of the ways men in our society think about what it means to be a man is something that individual men themselves and as a group, we have a lot of trouble figuring out and deciding. So how do we even talk about what is toxic masculinity? How do we even talk about that when people are not even sure what masculinity is or where it comes from? Which, by the way, it's a racist turn in the early 20th century, well documented, that white men really just got up one day and said, okay, now you got to be white to be a man. I mean, I kid you not. And that was because now black men were, moving into society, and they just said this. And that's been, since the 20th century, a real problem because men don't have to prove anything anymore. In the 19th century, if you became a chronic alcoholic, if you didn't support your family, you actually lost the privileges of being a man. They were removed from you. Now, if you just say it's natural and you just wake up as a man without having to earn masculinity, how then can I look at somebody else and tell them they're performing it wrong?
Thank you, Dr. Sacco, and thank you, Dr. Conley. I feel like we could have another part two of this conversation to delve into some of the things that you raised. I'm going to look over to Catherine for this one. So Catherine, what are some of the effects of victim blaming?
Yeah, so we're working with victims. Talking about the power and control wheel is definitely a tool that we utilize, and part of that power and control wheel is victim blaming, and that's what domestic violence is. It's all about power and control and how can they exercise that. So a lot of the times how this presents is maybe the victim has been told, if you wouldn't have texted that person, I wouldn't have hit you, or if you wouldn't have messed up my food, I wouldn't have told you how worthless you are, or if you wouldn't have worn that outfit, like you were just asking for it, I wouldn't have touched you like that. And what this does is it shifts the focus from the abuse to the actions of the victim, that they somehow deserve this, that if they would just fix their actions, it would stop the abuse. And this is a mindset that victims take on of, if I can just correct what I'm doing, or I just deserve this. This is how things are. And this is all I'm ever going to get because this is who I am. And they're constantly trying to change their behaviors instead of addressing the abuse. And so what we see with this is it leads to that low self-esteem. And when victims have that low self-esteem, they're less likely to, try to further their education, or try to pursue new opportunities, or get out of relationships that are not abusive, because they just think this is what I deserve and I'm never going to get any better. And it does, that one thing that started as what seems small of trying to make them feel like they deserve this particular instance of abuse turns into a lifelong effect on multiple aspects of their life.
So Catherine, can you talk about how Game Changers, the origination of it, really came out of the needs that our victim advocacy program identified years ago?
Yeah. So when we're working with victims, when we have contact with them, it's typically to address a current situation of domestic violence. But I would say more times than not, as we work with the victim, we end up finding out that their exposure to domestic violence actually started in childhood, adolescence. And that's where it began, whether it was mom and dad were in an abusive relationship and that was in the home, or they were abused themselves. That is what they normalized. And I've heard victims say over and over, I just thought that's how relationships worked. If you didn't follow directions or you didn't do this, the abuse followed, and that's just how things work. And I never knew that was unhealthy. So when we look at the perspective of the victim and we think back to what could we have done differently, or what if, what could have stopped this from happening? And we think about what if someone had stepped in when they were younger and said, hey, this is not okay. This is abusive behavior. It's not okay for someone to talk to you like that. It's not okay for someone to touch you like that. It's not okay for this kind of joke, and to, constantly perpetuate that kind of behavior. If someone had stepped in at that time when they're young and vulnerable and they're kind of developing their view of the world and how relationships work. If someone had stepped in and said, this is what it should look like and this is healthy, and that could have saved, years of hurt. And so that's exactly what I feel like Game Changers is it's that piece to step in and prevent the cycle from happening.
Thanks, Catherine. That is a great segue to Chris. And I know Kendrick touched on this in the beginning, but for those who were maybe flipping around, not knowing how to operate their Zoom, and they need to revisit this definition, tell us what bystander intervention is.
So bystander intervention, that is when you as the bystander would see a situation and then step in any way that you can safely to influence positively, in a positive way, the outcome of that situation. So whatever you can do to prevent sexual assault or rape from happening, whether you're at a party and you see a friend of yours that may potentially be getting taken advantage of. Maybe you want to step in and say, "Hey, are you ready to go? I know that you wanted me to take you home later." That's bystander intervention, or making sure that you would, if you saw something happening in a domestic situation, you stepped in and say, "Hey, are you okay?" Or "Hey, what's going on?" If you are comfortable in that situation. If you're not, then we always want to tell the kids to call 911 or call a trusted adult that you actually trust and feel like that you can talk to, and they'll hear you out. So just walking through steps of when you see something, not just standing back and just letting it happen, but actually stepping up, saying something, letting the victim know that you care and that you see them. That I think that's also an important part of bystander intervention, is letting them know that you care, and that this behavior isn't right, and someone's going to stick up for them. So, as it relates to Game Changers, when we talk to the kids about bystander intervention, is we want to make sure that they understand to keep themselves safe first, and not just step in thinking like, I can beat up this guy, or I can step in and they'll stop and do whatever. But actually training them on what to do and how to step in before anything gets started.
Thanks, Chris. And you're not off the hook. I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
So for Don and Kendrick, and either one of you can jump in for this one. So Game Changers serves middle school boys, young men. Can you talk about how should our focus teaching bystander intervention solely be for kids, for youth, or is it important that we reach adults as well? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and address that one. Thank you, Eliza. Like Chris was talking about with bystander intervention and Game Changers, it's the skill that we teach. And when I think about this question, I think about one of the skills that we teach that's a part of it, which is challenging your peers. And, we ask the kids when they hear something that's violates one of the principles they've learned, whether it's sexist or objectifying or victim blaming or a number of the topics that we've discussed, we ask them to challenge their peers and call them in, not call them out, and we go over that. But we need adult men to do that too, because I think, as it was mentioned earlier, it being a construct, it's not these like middle school boys aren't pulling it out of thin air. They're learning it from other people, including us, and in the ways that it's become seeped into us, like Dr. Conley said, the air that we breathe. So I like to say to the Game Changers mentors and to Kendrick that Game Changers is externally aimed at kids, but internally, I think it's important for us to aim at adult men as well. Because it's not like Kendrick or I or Chris or any of these guys who have been mentors decide to be mentors and then they've arrived and they understand this topic and they're truly anti-sexist, or they're as great as they can be. For us, it's a constant learning process. I know Kendrick and I talk about that regularly. So having that accountability structure, I think, in place for adult men, and adult men for us who are a part of our program, to be able to continue to be growing in this process of being anti-sexist as well as being working for bystander intervention. I think is super important to target men as well.
Thanks, Dawn. Another one for you, or Kendrick. Speaking of adults and the roles that they play in a youth's life, so whether it's a parent or a guardian, a caregiver, how can they teach boys to have a rich emotional life and deep connections to others and still be quote unquote full members in the society of men?
Yeah, so research shows that men, they struggle to express and identify with their emotions. So especially with young boys and growing up, they kind of mimic what they see, um, whether it be if they witness violence in the home or they witness violence with social media. They kind of struggle with those emotions. So one of the key things you have to do as a parent is just start building an emotional vocabulary, especially with your young men, and expressing things like, well, how do you feel today? Do you feel sad? It seems something minute, but as you start to build that vocabulary with these young men, they begin to recognize and associate those feelings with those emotions. And it's okay for you to be like, hey, hey, did you feel scared? Because I felt scared. And so they began to normalize and be like, okay, well, if my parents are vulnerable, then I can be, vulnerable as well. But you have to continue to like listen and teach them that it's okay. It's okay to cry. And so, because for so long, the only emotion that was accepted by boys is that we can show anger, but anything else is I'm vulnerable and I'm weak, and I'm makes me like less of a person. So the only way to combat that is we teach our young men to have like a vocabulary full of emotions, and not only just make them realize that, but also teach them like what each word means and what the value of those words. And to piggyback off of that, the next thing you have to do is listen. I know a lot of times as parents, we don't listen to our kids because, as some parents think, they have arrived, and we have to understand like we was once a child. So you got to listen to your kid. If you listen to your kid, it also gives them that peace of I can say these things, and my parent is not going to react in a negative way, and I can be vulnerable. And it also shows them that love component, which a lot of boys don't know how to love. They kind of, when it comes to relationships, they struggle with those emotions. They take their hearts out of a relationship, so they don't see women for how they need to see women. They just see them as objects. So in Game Changers, what we want to do is we want to combat that and tell them it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel emotional. Like you can cry over a woman. That's a good thing. That's happy. That's love. That's peace. That's understanding. So those are some ways that parents can combat like this stereotypical thing that boys don't have to they don't have to rely on just anger to survive, because at the end of the day it just that's an emotion that you want to remove from them.
Thank you, Kendrick. So, Chris, I'm coming back to you. So, from the mentor perspective, and Pete as well, what impact are you seeing from being a mentor in Game Changers, and whether that impact being on the boys that have been in the groups that you've led, or even on yourself?
I would definitely say just from going through the lessons and the sessions with the boys, they take it more seriously. You can tell in their tone and their emotions from when they see an image or when we watch a video. It has changed from first week until about that week that we've led up to. Their emotions have changed. Their thought process has changed. They felt like this is wrong. This is opening their eyes to something that is important. That as young men, we need to discuss. And at their age now, this is devastating to see, because maybe they've heard in their music, and we pick out lyrics in some of those sessions as well as letting them know like they didn't even know like that was in a song, you know. And so you just kind of agreeing to the music when you bopping your head and um, just unconsciously agreeing to what's going on and what's being said in the music. When it's objectifying women or if it's talking about rape, you know, you're contributing to that rape culture. And so just opening their eyes and letting them realize like this is a real thing. Um, and so not only with them seeing, you know, the seriousness of the discussions, but also just connecting to us as, you know, mentors and having that mentor mentee connection because we're able to talk and they're able to ask questions that they may not otherwise have asked or even felt to even discuss with their peers. So just an overall change from the way that they look at those type of topics and rape and understanding what it is and knowing how important it is to be a bystander and intervene. So they're more fired up when they feel like um, they may potentially run into a situation such as this, so they'll know what to do. You know, they feel more trained, they feel more aware, and they feel more connected to us as the mentees, as the mentors.
Pete, did you want to add anything to that
Yeah,
about the impact?
I do. I think early on when I began my first semester of Game Changers, I wasn't sure really what to expect. I knew we had the curriculum, and I knew that I had a list of students that I knew some, and some obviously I didn't know as well. And so I had anticipation of how it may turn out. And I was really pleased to see the connection when the kids were able to recognize the differences of maybe the diverse cultures, the backgrounds where they came from, maybe the concepts of what they knew as masculinity, what it whether it took shape in the home from their families, or whether it took shape from what media, music, or games that they played may have presented to them as the ideology as far as being masculine. What I loved being a part of and watching take shape is how some of my kids, the boys that I really anticipated would being problematic, how they took ownership in helping define the tone for the group and how they set the bigger picture within the classrooms after they left the group. Because the fortunate part for me, being a mentor at Richard Yoakley, was being able to work in that building. Um, and some of the tough parts that went along with that was that I recognized that I had my kids for 7 hours and 45 minutes a day. And society having them the remainder of the time, it was tough to know what's going to set in. How's this going to play a part whenever they're faced with these real world concepts back in their homes, back in their neighborhoods or environments? And I really was pleased to see how it took shape and how they built relationships that otherwise may have never taken shape with their classmates. Watching how some of those things within the curriculum took shape in the exchanges that they had with their classmates or in the cafeteria or being on the buses. And so, I think that going into it, assuming they having all the soft skills necessary to participate in this, it kind of took me back with the opportunity of understanding that between the generational gaps, maybe being raised in single family homes to where they are raising their siblings, that it was a bigger picture taking shape stemming from the time we spend each week with Game Changers.
Thank you. So, Pete, in your experience, can you tell us about any behavioral differences that you've seen in the school where Game Changers is taking place? Is that something that you're able to see, some positive effects from?
Absolutely. Leaning back on one boy, and obviously I can't mention his name, but I was concerned, and I kind of set a thought in my head that he may make it week 2, week 3, because this boy was a very angry young man. And I mean, more times than not, he solved 90% of his problems through his fists. And so that was concerning to me because I had to protect the overall group. And when I watched this young man grow into his understanding in the terms, because a lot of it is defining what these terms mean and defining that it's okay to recognize emotions. instead of seeing it as a weakness, but as a platform for growth. That young man really inspired me as a mentor, watching him become more of the leader of the group. And I say that to recognize that the overall disruptions within our middle school population from having those young men just within my group, I mean, it decreased. The outburst, the language, the inappropriate banter, throughout the school, throughout the classrooms, and in their special areas, it reduced almost instantaneous. And so to recognize that, and that obviously it affects the entire population, whether it be middle school or high school, because the language is different. You see a reduction in your referrals, you see a reduction in your suspensions. You see opportunities to, reach out to parents that may have questions, if you've got these conversations taking place in our groups. I would have parents that would call and say, hey, they come home excited to tell me about this, but I don't even know what that means. So I think it opened up a lot of opportunity. And I want to kind of go back, and forgive me because I can't remember who kind of opened that, but talking about outside of these young men that we are targeting with the Game Changer initiative, it is very important to find the means to reach out and connect with the families, because as mentioned, leaning back on these single parented homes, it's hard if that parent is the mother raising raising children that their siblings are all boys. And as I think Kendrick mentioned earlier, I was a child once, but I think it's fair to say that, in my home, that there was unconditional love and there was supports, and I was raised by all women, between my grandmother and mother. And so I didn't really have to combat for masculinity or prove myself within that. There was nurturing. But now you have an environment that's society is completely different for our children. And I think that, thank goodness, that our district is recognizing trauma-informed practices and putting more emphasis on, seeking to make our educators more aware of how to receive these students. But I mean, with all of that said, I definitely, there were a lot of great takeaways from the program.
Well, to build on that, Pete, and this really, for Kendrick, Chris, Dawn, Pete, who are touching the Game Changers program from a variety of perspectives, how can educators model healthy masculinity and being an active bystander for the youth they serve? And Pete, I'll throw that back to you. If there's anything that you want to tell your fellow educators, this is your moment.
Well, so I think that's educators walk into a building on a daily basis worried about certain criteria that they have to meet. And so there are already, I think, some undue pressures that they walk in with. And aside from that, they have so many things through XYZ that has to be covered. And I think sometimes it's important just to know that we have to strip away a lot of that, and we have to be transparent, and we have to model what we expect from our students. And we have to somehow climb away from all the pressures from the testing and from the certain norms that are expected within these walls of the educational environment. And I think we more importantly have to show our kids that we're human and that we're transparent and approachable. It is not uncommon on any given day to have 100+ kids walk by me at some point during the day, and they love, I'm the tall guy in the hallway because, let's face it, middle schoolers, they're still growing. But they have so many comments and so many things that they throw at me. And I have found, instead of trying to target back, I accept it with pride. And they're like, hey, little man, just these little things that otherwise would, I think certain circumstances would be a way to prove yourself. And I see that within these middle school boys, but I think you just have to be able to model the behaviors that you want to see in them. And it's okay to strip away your pride. It's okay to be human. And I think, or I can't remember who it was, but be vulnerable. Be vulnerable, because these kids see educators as these mountains that walk in every day that know everything and that's going to deliver them or prevent them from achieving success. And I think that if students had a way of knowing that adults carry around hardships and they have certain things that take shape in their personal lives, then they're able to see them as vulnerable and see them as a resource of or a means of climbing through these obstacles. So I think for educators, and that doesn't mean that you go out and spill your problems to these students, but I think that if you can just allow yourself to be seen as vulnerable and condition yourself to a means that, yes, you have to meet the criteria to this testing and your daily activities, but sometimes set aside the opportunity to have just these conversations that can build relationships, build trust, and work on creating an environment in your classroom that is welcoming, that they recognize safety, and that they don't tense up as soon as they walk in, having to become someone that they're not.
Thank you, Pete. That was you gave me a lot to think about. I really appreciate that very authentic response. It begs a question for me to either Dr. Sacco or Dr. Conley. And this isn't one of the prepared questions, but I know that as professors, you're able to take whatever comes to you. If you had a classroom full of young college students, males, that had gone through something like Game Changers and were in your courses or you were seeing them on campus, what kind of difference in the work that you do, what kind of difference do you think there would be if you had more male students, college students than not, who had this kind of experience or this kind of influence?
Well, I'll say that, I teach across the spectrum of undergraduate college students, and when I teach intro to sociology to first semester college students, which admittedly is a very narrow segment of the population, the young men who are in that class invariably say that the lessons that they learned about how to be a man in society very closely mimic what we've been talking about since the 70s. This idea of this boy code that various people on this call have mentioned already. That number one, don't engage in any kind of quote unquote sissy stuff, right? Don't ever be perceived as weak or feminine. Don't ever be perceived as gay. Number two, be a big wheel so that your sense of manliness must be measured by power and success. Number three, be a sturdy oak. Never have emotions. Be stoic. A reliable man or a real man must always be reliable in a crisis. He shows no weakness. And then number four, give them hell, which is that always exude this aura of daring and aggression. Be willing to take risks, even when other people around you tell you those risks are not not good ideas. And so the men in my classes tell me that these lessons continue to be true for them today. And regardless of whether or not those are the lessons or the specific values of the families that they grew up in or the households that they were in, regardless of whether or not those were the specific lessons that they learned from their immediate friendship group or from the caring relatives in their lives or the caring educators in their lives, those are still lessons that permeate society as a whole. And I think this is part of the issue with, we can talk about how there are multiple and diverse forms of masculinity, but as a sociologist, we talk about something called hegemonic masculinity, which is the standard against which all men must be measured. Not because that is the way that men are, but that's because that's how we've constructed this idea of masculinity. And there are so many other forms of alternative masculinities that exist and that people create. And yet there is this one standard against which all men are measured. The sociologist Irving Goffman wrote about how in a very real sense, there's only one unblushing man in society, and he goes through this list of all the things that men must measure up to, and I won't remember all of them, but it's a they have to have a college education, they have to be successful in business, they must be married, they must be heterosexual, they must be white, to go back to something that Dr. Sacco mentioned before around toxic masculinity and whiteness and how that intersects. And this is a form of masculinity that most men can't measure up to, either by virtue of their race, or by virtue of their interests or their circumstances. The point is not whether men can measure up to it or not. The point is that that's a hegemonic standard that men are going to be judged against, and almost every man is going to be found lacking when they're compared to that standard. So whether or not individual boys and men feel that these standards are good or right, we live in a society which reveres certain expressions of masculinity over others. And to speak more explicitly to your question, what if we had more boys and men who go through a program that would expose them to more alternative forms of masculinity, more ways to express who they are, even outside the boundaries of masculinity, more gender variance, period. I think it's always good to have more opportunities to expose young people and people of any age to these possible variations of the human existence. It certainly helps to show that there are other models and gives some recognition to the fact that other models exist. Now, whether or not that changes the social structure as a whole, that's another question.
Thank you, Dr. Conley. Dr. Sacco, did you want to weigh in at all?
I was thinking when Kendrick and Chris were talking and then Pete was talking, I thought back to there was a TV series last year, David Makes Man. Did you see this? It's going to have a second season now. It's going to be on HBO Max. It's written by the same man who wrote Moonlighting, and it's structured a little bit similarly, but it's about a young Black man. I think he's like, I think he's in a private high school or a private middle school. It's like your age kind of kids, and he's in a prep school, and he's hoping for the future, but he's very confused. And what I appreciated about this series was it's told from his inner life. And so a teacher who's African American and trying to mentor him, and in a cliched way, the great teacher is talking to him. He's not hearing a thing she's saying because his inner life is in such turmoil about something else. She's completely unaware, and they're going like this. And in the series, his friends don't know there's this disconnect. And I think it's when Kendrick talked about giving them words for emotions. He's very smart. He has no idea how to communicate what's inside of him. And what he does is it's the same technique as in Moonlighting. There's an older Black male who was his father figure, also a dead drug dealer, that he talks with. But that is his only mentor. And that is the person that he has to have sort of these fantasies to speak with. This is horribly sad. But on the other hand, it really demonstrates how often do we see the inner lives of really complex, like sort of recognizably human young Black boys on TV. Never. I mean, I'm a white woman and I hardly see anything that actually reflects my life. And I've never seen the life of a Black boy dealt with this sort of sophistication before. I think that's a really important lesson, because I think sometimes we like to think like we're all human or we're all alike, but we're not. And that poor young man and me don't exactly know how to talk. I'm sure I could do a great deal for him in court, but I don't think he could communicate anything to me. And I don't know if that's just about being a man, or perhaps young Black male experience is not affirmed in any way that seems valid, to go from your inner life to things you would feel confident expressing to other people. So I can't imagine how a bystander intervention program could not be helpful by at least getting people to recognize that what they think might be going on with someone is not. You know, I also taught high school at the second worst high school in LA, and every student was black or brown. They were all in the Crips or Bloods. And the main gang leader got busted one day. He was going to murder someone on campus. I was his mentor. And he came to me and I was begging him not to shoot this kid. And he was like, he could be central casting the wicked guy. And he was 17 and he just collapsed in my arms, crying like a baby. And I could see the boy, the child, the desperation that was there. But I'm sure that wasn't going to be revealed again. So it's one thing to teach an emotional language to all people. But also, if you teach young Black men one emotional language, we also have to have other people listening to it and hearing it and recognizing that it's there.
Thank you, Dr. Sacco. So we just have just a few more minutes. This time has really flown by, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to seriously do maybe a part 2 and a part 3 at some point in the future, given that we're all probably going to be virtual for a while. So just in terms of action, because I know that's, when people hear about this kind of work, this kind of information, it's well, what can I do? I want to turn this to Catherine first. So, and this is for the very serious matter. So, when somebody suspects someone being a victim of abuse, what are some actions that she or he can take to offer support or help?
Yeah, thanks, Eliza. So, really, the first step is saying, I believe you. And that's vital to helping a victim. And a lot of times, victims have this belief that they're not going to be believed. Maybe the abuser is based on their social status, or they're involved in their church, or they're well liked by multiple people in the community. And they think, if I disclose this, no one's going to believe me, and I'm only going to be alienated for saying this. So start with, I believe you. And then it really moves into validating that this treatment and this abuse that you're experiencing is not okay, and it's not your fault, and that there is help. And how can I support you? And anytime you're supporting a victim, kind of the approach we always use is let them be the expert on their own safety. And what I mean by that is they know their abuser better than we ever would. They know what's going to escalate a situation. They know what is going to be the safest course of action for them. So let them be in control of that. And by giving them control, which is something that has been taken from them in the relationship, you're giving them that confidence to take that next step and let them guide this process. And it's also important too, to know, and I think to our adult victims, and then even thinking back to, teenage relationships, and that a statistic that always stands out to me is that a victim returns to their abuser an average of 7 times before they leave for good. And so what we don't want to see is, and I think again, back to these teenage relationships or adult, is, an episode happens, they break up for a little while, and then they go back together. Like it's just what they do. And we normalize this cycle of abuse. And we also see sometimes too, victims have the experience where a family or a friend says, you've done this for years. It's the same thing over and over, and you keep going back. Like, don't come to me unless you're like really ready to make a change. And the victim then feels even further isolated and may not disclose ever again. And it could be, detrimental to them. And so continuing that support, that no matter what your choice is or what your plan is, I am here to support you, but I'm concerned for your safety. And how can I take steps to support you? Can I connect you with someone that would be able to explain to you all of your options. And one thing we tell people a lot whenever we're doing community education or trainings is that a lot of times when we don't know specifics on a topic or we're not really comfortable with the ins and outs, we tend to shy away from wanting to talk about them. So a lot of people, domestic violence is not their wheelhouse. And so they think it's a private issue. And I think that's a mindset that's been around for a long time. This is a private issue. But what we always tell people is that you don't have to be the expert on this, but all you have to do is connect them to somebody who can guide them through next steps. So whether that be a YWCA advocate or law enforcement, whoever it is, but again, letting them be in control of what those next steps are that are going to be, that are going to keep them safe. But again, really the first step and the most important is letting them know that you believe them.
Thanks, Catherine. And then I'm going to ask either Dawn or Kendrick to wrap us up. And how do we empower a viewer who is watching this to intervene? And it may be, with the seriousness of what Catherine just talked about, or it could be something that is maybe a little bit more innocent. How, what is it that the average person can do, man or woman? How can we help them be a better bystander?
When you see it, call it out. Don't be afraid to speak out on these issues. I know it's important as men that we continue to carry on this fight for women. That we continue to be more voice. We continue to be a voice for women, and that's what we want to teach our young men, to have a voice and don't be afraid. And we supply you with the necessary knowledge and the tools through our bystander intervention for ways that you can do that. And like I said, at the end of the day, you can't keep anyone safe if you're not safe. So to just continue to acknowledge the fact that there is an issue, and it's a serious issue. And Chris, Pete, and Don, we're all in this this fight together. And we want to, and all of our other mentors who are part of the Game Changers program, we want to continue to encourage, our brothers to help us as we become men and men of, because these boys are looking up to us. So we gotta paint this picture that we are standing strong for our women, and to find ways to do that, and keep themselves safe, as well as help our society. And to women, just continue to express yourself and allow for help to come in when these individuals are trying to assist you. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And we tell our young boys like to speak up for our young girls. And most of the time, more than not, when these young girls feel like someone else cares, then that opens them up for the assistance that they need. So that's how I would encourage. And Don may be able to elaborate more on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick that when we teach bystander intervention to middle school boys, we do it this way. And I think it's true, but I think it's true for everyone too, is everyone comes to it at a certain point. Maybe, you see a situation and you're not sure it's wrong. You want to intervene and you don't know how, you aren't sure what to do, or you don't think of it in the sense of if your friend says something inappropriate or an offensive joke, right? No matter where you are, reach out and talk to us, because we've been through that phase, or we've been in that area. We have guys, we have resources to provide to help you think about it in new ways, in different ways, and break through the bystander effect and be an active bystander. So regardless of what area you're in, just I think being willing to look it up and learn, and learn about each of the challenges with each of the areas that you're at. So that's what I'd say.
Well, thank you, everybody. I know that I think we're right at an hour. We're a little over an hour, but I know that we could probably go on for another hour. So I really thank you for your time and your passion and your expertise, sharing that with each other and sharing that with those who will be watching this. So on behalf of the YWCA and the Game Changers program, thank you very much. And we will be coming back to you with some more good topics and, if you can participate in Game Changers as a mentor, if you have students who can sign up for Game Changers, we know that it will be worth their while. So thank you on behalf of YWCA.